Park rating is a huge part of Rollercoaster Tycoon, not least because in most scenarios you need to meet a certain number to beat the goal, and in some scenarios you can't let your park rating drop below a certain level at all. And of course, the higher your park rating, the more chance of new guests showing up, because we all love a good theme park more than an average one. But how does it actually work? What can you do if you're nearing the end of the scenario and you are below your required rating? What if you must keep the rating above 700 but it's dropped too low and now you only have 4 weeks to save it? Well, to answer those questions we need to understand how the park rating is calculated so that we can look and see which areas might be damaging our chances of attracting new guests and winning the scenario. And hat tip to Dirklig, who has broken down all the maths in a comprehensive guide which you'll find in the description of this video if you're interested to see the code and algorithm. So here's how it works in terms of gameplay. When you begin a new park, you actually start with a high park rating, usually 1150, although some tougher scenarios do begin with 1050. Not that you'll ever see that. That's the starting point the game's calculation uses before adding in all kinds of factors to get the actual park rating you see on screen. In effect, for every factor, you begin in the red, and as you play the game, you reduce that negative factor to gain your park rating. So let's take a look at those factors. On the chart on the right of the screen you can see where the park rating starts, and the worst possible impact each factor can have. Reducing these deductions is the way to keep your park rating high. From that initial figure of 1150, 150 is deducted for guest count. As your guest count climbs, that negative number reduces by 1 for every 13 guests, until you get to over 2,000 guests, at which point nothing is deducted from the park rating for guest count. Guest happiness. This can be a big one, because 500 is deducted from your park rating for guest happiness. To start getting that back, you need happy guests, which the game counts as anybody with better than 50% happiness. The game applies a calculation here. The number of happy guests is times by 300, that number divided by 250, and then that number is times by 2. If your park has fewer than 250 guests, that number is replaced in the calculation by the number of guests you do have in your park. The result of that sum is added back to your park rating until you've clawed back the full 500 points. To keep this simple, if around 4 out of 5 of your guests have 50% happiness or better, you won't lose anything for this factor. Don't let your guests get lost, not too many anyway. A negative value is how many are lost, added to the number leaving the park. There's a cushion of 25 guests here, which allows for those naturally leaving the park, but if for some reason many are leaving at once or lots are lost, your park rating starts to take a hit, and a big hit. -7 points are taken from your park rating for every guest lost or leaving the park above 25. So if you inherit a park with a large or confusing path network, and looking at you, Evergreen Gardens, then make sure guests can't access it. Often, if you see your park rating dive and you're not sure why, it could be that you've accidentally cut off a path somewhere and left guests stuck. Rides with large downtime also hurt your rating. If your downtime is 100%, i.e. all rides always broken down because you forgot to hire a mechanic, you'll lose 200 points. You lose no points if every ride has 0% downtime. That's almost impossible unless you're at the very start of a scenario, so you're likely to lose some points here. Just don't let it be too many. So have regular safety checks and enough mechanics to ensure any broken down rides are swiftly fixed. As with many factors of the game, excitement and intensity of the ride are taken into account, because, after all, good rides usually make a good park, and you certainly can't have a good park without any good rides. For the park value though, the calculation is looking for you to have a balance of rides, so opting to fill your park with high intensity and excitement coasters might be good for park value, but it's not good for park rating. The calculation looks for excitement across the park to be at an average of around 3.7 and intensity averaging around 5.2. If you massively fail on this, don't worry, the maximum penalty is only 100 from your park value, so it doesn't hurt too much in a scenario such as Gentle Glen where you may not have that many intense coasters. However, as well as averaging the excitement and intensity, the game also calculates the total excitement and intensity across your park. If your excitement and intensity both total 80 across the entire park, there is no penalty. If you have no rides, the penalty is 200 points. So, as you add rides, this deduction reduces until your total excitement and intensity are both at 80. We know guests will complain about the amount of litter in your park. Nobody likes to see trash everywhere, and that is also reflected in the park rating calculation. You lose 4 points off your park rating for every piece of litter dropped, up to a massive deduction of 600. So make sure you have enough trash cans around your park that litter doesn't need to be dropped, and enough handymen to pick up litter which is dropped. Now, I know plenty of you like to kill your guests, and some do it tactically in order to get new guests through the gate to pay an entry fee, but needless to say, it harms your park rating. I'm sure we've all had scenarios where a ride crashes and park rating drops off big time. Every vehicle that crashes with guests on board will knock 200 from your park rating, and another 25 is deducted for every guest that dies, up to a total of 1,000 points from your park rating. Finally, it's worth noting that park rating will always be between 0 and 999. So if the calculation works out that somehow you should have a negative rating, then at least you'll stay at 0. Likewise, if your park is so good that you barely have any deductions, then 999 will be your park rating. And that's it. So, if your park rating is struggling on Rollercoaster Tycoon, take a look at some of those factors and you should be able to troubleshoot where you're going wrong, or what areas you can target to increase your park rating. Again, thanks to Dirklink for breaking down the code in his park ratings guide, and thanks to you for watching.